for being here. These are some, I believe, record-breaking numbers for the amount of people we have showing up for Ignite these days, which is awesome to see. Before we get into what we're going to talk about at all, I do want to reiterate what Carrie said. Do not feel bad about interrupting me. In this setting, it's a little harder for me to see if somebody has a question or something as opposed to in person. So feel free to chime in at any point in time. If I'm talking about something that you want to either ask a question about, and likewise, if you guys have an experience about something we're talking about that you want to share with the group because you think it's helpful, or you've got a question about something you did in the past that either did or didn't work well for you, please, speak up so we can, because everybody will be able to learn from whatever it is that you're thinking about. You're not the only one thinking about it most of the time. So we will dive in today. We're going to be talking about negotiating offers, which is honestly less about negotiating and more about just making sure that you're thinking ahead as you're moving through the process. I think so much more of negotiating is really a matter of making sure that you've already kind of identified what you think the next potential steps are so that you can be doing the right thing in the current step. So we'll certainly talk through that. A lot of it is psychology, in my opinion, just a matter of, kind of working through what choices are available to people and getting a better understanding of how they're going to react to them and making sure you don't immediately start on the wrong foot and get poor responses from people right out of the gate. So I'm going to share my screen. That's going to be a PowerPoint. Most of the time, this will be what's up on the screen. When we get to ahas and questions and stuff, we will take that down periodically. And bear with me. This isn't stuff that I do every day, so I might be a little clunky when it comes to this. So, all right. Okay. Everybody sees that on the screen, correct? All right.
It's in presenter mode though, I think. So if you want to go to that display settings again and make the PowerPoint part bigger.
Display setting. Swap view.
That's it, yeah.
Interesting. When I make it say when I swap view, it's in presenter mode on my screen now, but it's not on everybody else's.
Presenter mode on ours too, though.
Oh, okay.
You did something earlier that fixed it, but I don't.
Let me see. How about now? Is it still?
Gary, I think he may have to do the same thing I had to do to just show that part of the screen only. I don't remember what you did, but
do it not in presenter view though, because Andrew's not looking at the notes.
Oh, here. That better? Okay. There's 3 dots under the picture that says hide presenter view mode. Okay.
I think you need to reshare your screen now, though.
Oh, perfect. Did we make it?
Perfect.
All right. All right. Excellent. All right. Okay. All right. So I find it interesting that the course overview involves a lot more than just negotiating offers. Obviously, that's all we're really talking about today, so I'm not quite sure. The course overview for all of Ignite appears to be here at the beginning as opposed to just the negotiation section. So today's agenda, obviously, we're going to discuss kind of what is negotiating. And then secondly, the 3 Ps being prepare, present, and position the offer that we have. That's going to be the majority of what we talk about today, are those 3 things. As we move through those 3 things, we'll certainly stop at the end of each one, maybe discuss some scenarios, get some feedback from you guys as to good questions you're thinking of that would be helpful to ask based on certain scenarios to either get your clients closer to the table of a transaction or questions to be asking the other agent to try and get the information you need to try and make the best win-win that you possibly can. We'll discuss some negotiating tips. I'm always super curious to hear what other people have to say about that too. I'll certainly share all the ones that I have, but I by no means know everything there is to know. So hopefully you guys have some good ones you can bring to the table as well. And then at the end, we will go through some ahas for the whole session. So I think this is key, especially in the world that real estate has become in the last decade or so. Say Negotiating is not something to be avoided or feared. I feel like there are lots of agents that go through almost an entire transaction without ever talking to the other agent on the phone, which I think is a massive disaster. Miscommunication and best potential outcomes don't happen when you have no idea what the choices even are. So I think that's an interesting statement to try to internalize. That I think a lot of times we're like afraid to ask other people questions, afraid to try and get some information from them because we feel like we're breaking the rules or something like that. When it comes to negotiating and dealing with another party to try and put a transaction together, the only rules are regarding confidentiality for your own client. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to get information from people, including your own clients. I think a lot of times we're afraid to ask them questions that could be tough, such as, what happens if we don't get this thing that's really important to you? How would we handle that? And I think those questions go unanswered, and then it turns into bigger problems. So please keep that in mind as we're going through this today, that run towards the negotiation, not away from it, basically. Oh, why is that? Oh, there we go. Okay. I think I was looking through this yesterday and trying to equate how many of these felt like they really fit into the idea of negotiating a transaction. And I'm curious to get your thoughts. So speak up. As you look through our belief system as a company, which of these things do you think like really jive with negotiating a transaction for your client and with another party that's not your client? Which of these feel like they're the most important to you, and why?
John says all of them in the chat.
All of them. Well, you got a lot of explaining to do then. Any thoughts? Anything really stand out to you? I'm going to share mine if nobody else will, but I'd love to hear others.
Well, I'll share. Obviously, win-win. When you want to create a situation where it's a win-win for yourself, your client, in the whole situation where everybody's going to get something out of it. Integrity plays a huge part, in what it is that we do. We want to, negotiate things in the right way, in the right manner, and then doing what's best for our customers, So, just to start, I don't want to go through all of them, but I feel like all of them fit in some kind of way.
I think you're right. Anybody else? Anybody have anything that really stands out to them as like a key piece of how they feel like a negotiation has to happen in order to be successful?
I mean, so I probably agree with John with most of them, but I think communication is key, especially for me. I'm not saying everyone communicates as they should, but I'm opposed to it. I want open lines of communication through every step of the process, from seeing the house to trying to organize when to pick up the keys. So I think being like responsive and just talking about what's going on is very important to the client, to the agent, to the broker, everyone involved.
For sure. Anybody else?
Brian?
I think creativity comes into play a little bit, Andrew, with regards to multiple offers, negotiating ROCs. How can we be creative in bringing both parties' wants and needs to the table when somebody wants this but the other party's not giving in? And how can we be creative in bringing and writing things up so that it appeases both parties?
For sure. Brian, did you have something?
He had communication in the chat.
Communication. Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting the things that have come up here, because for me, as I look through this yesterday morning, kind of preparing for today, the two that really stood out to me were communication and creativity. Communication. This is one of the things that I live by in my role here is seek first to understand. I think a lot of times we get told things by our client, by the other agent, that are some kind of ironclad statement that this is the way it has to be. Like, if we can put this together, it has to close by this date because of this. Or if we can't get it done with these concessions, then we can't move forward. And to go back to those scenarios and question what the reason is behind that. Because I think a lot of times people have kind of a set way in their mind that something should go. And without getting a better understanding of what it is that they think needs to happen, it's hard to find out how true the statement is that it has to be that way and there's not another choice. So I think that's a huge one, which just requires, going deeper, which is something we talk about a lot in training here, just being able to ask more questions and go a little bit deeper. And then the creativity, Colleen hit the nail on the head. I think we have to be able to come up with better ideas to get better results. And I think in a lot of cases, there's tens or dozens of ways to get through impasses between a buyer and a seller. And if we're only going to do the same one we've always done, we'll never get any better results. And it leaves a lot of people feeling like they're in an impossible situation when they're not. So I think those are the two big ones for me. So it's great to hear some of the things that really stood out to you guys. But I agree with John's first statement. I think you could probably make a great argument for every single one of these as to why they really matter. And this kind of stuff, it's really important that when we're writing an offer and going through a negotiation process with our clients, that we can really step back and kind of start with that 10,000 foot view and look at the whole situation with the right perspective, as opposed to the perspective of just like putting the deal together. Because often so much gets left behind and deals don't get done in ways that they could have gotten done that would have been better for everybody. So, all right. So path of negotiation, this seems like a no-brainer here. You write an offer and it either gets accepted or it doesn't. So if it doesn't, you've got two choices. It either gets rejected or countered. Obviously, if an offer gets rejected, you are kind of negotiating with yourself if you go back to the table as a buyer and try to put something else together. And if it's countered, obviously the seller's already started the negotiation. The one thing that bothers me a bit about this is at the end, I guess it still says rejected, but it leads me to believe at the beginning of this chart that like every offer can lead to an acceptance. And I don't think that's the case. And I think it's really important that we are clear with our clients about how important it is to put a deal together, because oftentimes we look at walking away from a negotiation with no agreement as a failure. And I don't know that it is. There are times where our buyers or sellers have a goal that can't be met in a certain negotiation with a certain other buyer or seller, and that's okay. It's really important that we know that that's okay so that we do the right thing, but it's definitely okay. I thought this was interesting. This has been something I've thought through for a long time, primarily in relation to the stat of when listing agents talk about the percentage of list price they get. In my own mind, I've always thought that's because they're really good at negotiating with their own clients, as opposed to somehow magically better at selling a house for way more money than somebody else. But I think it is interesting to think about the fact that we do negotiate with both our clients as well as the other agent and their clients to get to an agreement that's right for everybody. Can anybody talk through a scenario they've had recently where they had a really good outcome come out of having to negotiate more with their own client than with the other party?
So sorry, what was the question? If you've negotiated more with your client than the other agent?
Yeah, a good outcome that came from having to negotiate more with your own client to get over the finish line than to negotiate with the other party. So I've got a couple of pretty good ones, but I feel like if I've got some good ones, so does everybody else. Anything at all from anybody? Okay, I'll share one and maybe it'll spark some thoughts in your minds about some things that you've had to do with your own clients recently. So I recently sold a house in Lorain County that had a septic system. The house was built in the 50s, and so the septic was from the 50s. The understanding was that it was probably not in great shape, as they usually aren't when they're that old. So, we obviously, like everybody at this point in time, we ended up in multiple offers and had an escalation clause, and we bought the house. It was listed for $199 and we bought it for $227. And I had told them initially what to expect from the septic, and I think the listing agent felt the same way. So we do the septic inspection, comes back bad. We write an ROC saying that we want the seller to fund an escrow account to pay for the replacement of the septic. And we'll get 2 estimates and do the, same as our septic addendum says. And my buyers were okay with that. And the counter we got back from the seller was that they had it looked at already and kind of had a plan in place and would just replace it before closing. I thought to myself that sounds fantastic. When I talked about that with my buyers, they got very concerned, and they didn't like that idea at all because they wanted to control the replacement of it. What I came to find out was I think they wanted to control the replacement of it more so because they didn't understand septic, so they were kind of afraid of it. So they assumed that there were lots and lots of choices and decisions that needed to be made, as if you were going out to buy a car versus install a septic system. When if you know much about septics, that's not generally the case. There's not a whole lot of choices. The county says what can be put in, and that's what gets put in. But I had to do a lot of negotiating with them to just get them to a place of understanding and feeling like, okay, this is the outcome we wanted, because they ran from it like it wasn't the outcome they wanted. And had I just folded on that and went back to the seller and said, no, that's not the way we're going to do this. We have to escrow for it. They want to control it. My people would probably still be living in their little apartment in North Olmsted. So it was definitely the right result, but it definitely took some negotiating with my own clients to get there. So does that story spark any ideas? I'm really curious because I feel like we've all got some stories about negotiating with our own clients to get them kind of out of their own way.
I had a client who, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
Okay. I had a client who all she had to do in order to remove the contingency was to fix a hole in the ceiling. And everything, she got what she wanted as far as like a cash offer. She got the purchase price, like what we listed it for. And all we had to do was patch up the hole in the ceiling in one of the units and figure out what the issue was as far as like where the water was coming from. I told her basically, like, I had a contractor who was working on a house around the corner from her home, and the fix ended up being only $100. She wanted to sell the property as is, but I explained to her, like, everything that, this is the only thing that the buyer is asking for is $100 fix. And, once this removal of contingency is, once this contingency is removed, it's smooth sailing from here, because it was an all cash deal, no financing contingency. Everything was fine, and after talking to her in regards to it, her, things changed for her, and she, she was all for it. So I kind of talked to her, I guess, like, gave her like everything as far as like what things looked like in order to change her mind and give her a different perspective.
That's great. That's great. Anybody else? Okay. Well, I think Shay stole one of the words I have on here as my notes, which is perspective, because I do think negotiating, especially with our own clients, as opposed to trying to negotiate real terms and things like that with the listing agent or the buyer's agent, is really just a matter of, it's an expectations and a perspective game. That's all it is. And sometimes our people are just like, if it's not going the way they expected, that means it's bad, which isn't true. And we know that, because things don't go the way they're expected to go all the time. And it doesn't mean it's bad. It just means you have to be able to look at it differently. And same idea with perspective. If they're looking at it from the wrong perspective, they're approaching it from the wrong direction, which makes it bad. And it's not always bad. Fixing that hole in the ceiling for $100 was not bad. It was good. but it sounded bad at first. Having the seller replace the septic out in Grafton for my clients, they looked at it as bad. And it wasn't bad, it was good. But we had to change perspective. So that's super important to think about. All right. Obviously, there's really only two things we negotiate with the other party, and that's price and terms. There's 1,000 terms and there's one price. I will say one thing about this that I think often goes undone, and we will put our clients, especially when on the buyer side, we will put our clients far and away to an advantage if we have a very clear understanding going in of what terms are important to the other party and what terms are really important to our own clients, which I think is another scenario where we have to dig a little deeper. When our clients say that they, it's really important that they move by this date, and then we're kind of at an impasse because the seller says they don't want to move until some other date that's past the date your client wants to move. Like, we have to figure out ways to bridge those gaps as opposed to just both parties draw a line in the sand and no deal gets done. And maybe that date wasn't as important as they thought at first, but if you don't ask any questions, you don't get to the better result. So keep that in mind. I think a lot of times we get concerned about making our clients unhappy by questioning them on things, but the reality is the other choice is they don't buy the house they want to buy. And I think when presented with that as the other choice, they can change their mind pretty quick about some of the other terms that are really important to them. So always be aware of that. And I hope all of you are talking to listing agents before writing offers. I think that's the best way to try and bridge gaps right out of the gate, is just to be in communication and make sure you understand what's a win for the seller, and then try to find those same wins for the buyer. And hopefully they already intersect. And when they don't, that's when we have to do a good job. Right? Okay. So obviously we're to the first set of ahas. Any thoughts or ideas that you've gotten here that are different from the way you approached this before? Anything at all in regards to negotiating with your own client? Because I feel like that's a big part of that first piece of this. And I think again, I think oftentimes we are less willing to negotiate with our own client than we need to be to help them get out of their own way. But any thoughts or stories about that? All right, we will move on. At the end, you guys are going to have to give me some ahas, though. I hope you know that. So.
I have something.
Go ahead.
I just was having issues with my mute button. So if I may, just speaking from the other side, having done several transactions, just sometimes I like to think of what the client is feeling in those moments. And so having been in those transactions myself and having to be in a position where the realtor was literally negotiating with me as their client, what worked was them really empathizing with what I was trying to accomplish, at that moment, and what I really felt strongly about. There was one person, one realtor who really reached me and said, listen, if we don't try to meet them halfway here, I'm afraid that, you may end up losing this opportunity. And I know how important it is, like you said, to you, to your family, etc. And that's how they really reached me. Maybe it was, a really emotional time. I don't know. But I think that sometimes we forget, because we're just, plugging away, trying to get through the transaction, that we can lose sight of really trying to connect with the other side of how that client is feeling. So you may get more, headway made doing something like that, really trying to empathize.
Yeah, no, and I guess I hope my point about negotiating with our clients wasn't lost there. I want to, I guess, reiterate that a bit. I think when we're negotiating with our clients, it's negotiating based on the things that are important to them. right? And having a clear understanding of that, which is actually the beginning of the next section, which is the prepare section of negotiating. And really the beginning of that process is fully understanding what our clients' goals are and what and their difference between needs and wants, and being able to kind of reground them in their needs as we move forward together. Because I think you're right, Joy. I mean, it's the only way we can negotiate well with our clients is when we're bringing them back to the things that are most important to them, not just getting the deal done. You know, getting the deal done is secondary to all of this. Doing a really good job of grounding our clients to their goals and helping them navigate dealing with somebody else being grounded to their own goals is our job, right? And if we do that well, in the end, our clients get the things that were most important to them that they may have been willing to sacrifice because of things that really weren't that important, but in the heat of the moment felt really important. So yeah, I'm in total agreement with you, Joy, as far as what I mean by negotiating with our clients and really connecting with them on a deep level as to what matters most, because that's the only way to win, is to get them to that place of getting the things that matter most to them, for sure.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks for chiming in. I appreciate that, because I may not have come across that way at first. So I'm glad you said something. Okay, so we're gonna get into the 3 Ps now. So first one being prepare. Right at the top, know your goal. So know your goal and know your client. Those are the 2 biggies that I think are super, super important, because otherwise all you really are doing is trying to get to a finish line, which gives you some real stinky commission breath, if that's all you're trying to do. If you don't know who you're working for and what their goals are, then we don't have a whole lot of purpose. So those are the things that give us purpose in this business. Think ahead. This is something that, as the broker here, is a conversation that I have frequently with people who are in a difficult situation, because oftentimes that's when I start talking to them, is when they're in a difficult situation. It is super important that we are talking with our clients about how things are going to look tomorrow, next week, next month, when we're writing an offer with them. You know, think of all the things that have to happen within the first 5 days, 7 days, 10 days of having a contract. And if those things aren't being talked about the moment you're talking about the possibility of writing an offer, like, it's already too late. You gotta be, because what's happening is, if we don't set the expectations of what's going to happen next and how it's going to happen and what's normal, our clients set their own expectations, and oftentimes they're not right. And then you're kind of setting them up for failure. So really thinking ahead about just the process, and then secondarily thinking ahead about, like, what would be, you know, if you're entertaining whether you write an offer at this price versus an offer with an escalation clause, or doing this inspection or not doing that inspection, whatever it is. Really thinking through, like, what's the next result of that choice? And then what's the result maybe 2 or 3 steps down the road of that choice, and discussing that with your clients so they really understand the consequences of the choice they're making today and how it's going to affect the choices they're going to be able to make or not make days down the road, weeks down the road. And again, what you know, this is a kind of a cliche in this business, but in the largest transactions that they're going to do in their lives. So we need to make sure that we're clear on that. I think sometimes selling a house can quickly turn into, you know, something that feels very similar from our perspective as somebody who's selling, like, a fence job, putting in somebody's backyard fence or something. This is a much bigger deal than that. And so we've got to be clear about what's ahead and what those expectations need to be. Be informed. I think the big thing there is, please make sure, if you guys are doing business in a location for the first time, or a type of property, whether it be, you know, agricultural property for the first time, or the first time you're selling something that's rural with a septic, or the first time you're selling a property that has tax abatement, or whatever it is, like, make sure that you are educated in that stuff before you dig too deep with your clients, because they're looking to you to know that stuff and prepare them. So you've got to make sure you know it. And luckily, you guys are all at a place that's got at least one agent that's already gone through the thing that you're about to go through. So always feel free to reach out if there's things you don't know about and you're trying to do something for the first time. Obviously, obey the laws. I shouldn't have to say that to anybody. Obey the laws. And lastly, know your documents inside and out. We're going to talk about some of that stuff as we move through here. But the thing I want to make sure that we're clear about is that everybody knows where some basic things are in our contract, because I've been getting some questions about that over the last 6 months here. And I just want to make sure we are clear on it. So you guys will be the first to get this speech from me, but I'm going to be giving it a few other times. I hope everybody knows where the earnest money language is in our contract. Earnest money language about it going back to the buyer if there's never a release signed is on page 1 in the financing section. I think it's really important that there's a few things that you're telling all your clients about our documents when they're going through and signing them. And one is when earnest money is due and what happens to it depending on the different directions the transaction can go. So make sure you know that and you know it well. You should have it memorized so that you can discuss it on the phone with people while you're driving if you need to. And then how things go after an inspection. I think earnest money and inspections are two things where buyers and sellers think completely opposite of each other. And it can cause a real disaster if you're not setting the right expectation for at least your client. Sometimes we can't control the other person and they may have the wrong expectations and there's not much we can do about that sometimes, but we can definitely control our own clients' expectations, or at least make sure we're clear about what they should be. What they do with that is up to them. But make sure you're clear on what that inspection section says on, I believe it's page 3 of our contract. And then the earnest money language that's right at the beginning. And kind of when it needs to be deposited and kind of how it works. Those are the two biggies that seem to be trip hazards for people. Anybody have any questions about that before we move on? Okay, I know that's it's not the most fun stuff.
Do you have an example of like specifically the inspection part, what you mean?
Yeah, so the inspection section of the contract says a lot of things that your buyer's agreeing to and the seller's agreeing to. So whether you're representing a buyer or a seller, it's really important that one, your buyer understands that when we check yes for general home inspection, we're putting in amount of days that you have and checking who pays for it, right? So those two things, important they understand that they pay for it or not. I mean, it's rare to see a seller pay for that, but that's checked and it's decided. And the amount of days they have to do it. And then beyond that, it's really the language, and the language beneath is important for buyers and sellers, which says that, the buyer has to submit something in writing within 3 days. And that upon receipt of that, the seller has 3 days to respond. And if they don't respond, you don't exactly have a contract anymore, but that gets really touchy really quick. So don't assume just not responding means the deal's dead. But in essence, if either party starts breaking that agreement, the other party can proactively determine that they don't have a deal anymore. And so it's really important that everybody understands those deadlines and the way those events are going to play out. Because oftentimes sellers just think, well, after the inspection, one of two things. They think after the inspection, they're going to get a to-do list and that they have to do it, which is untrue. Or they think after the inspection that they're not going to get anything from the buyer and they're just going to be allowed to move forward. And if the buyer wants out, that they get the earnest money, which is also not true. Right? So it's important that sellers understand what that process looks like and that the buyer does, because very quickly, if you're busy, it's pretty easy for a buyer to not have scheduled an inspection in time. And then there's a whole lot of heartache 6 days into the contract and an inspection hasn't even been scheduled. And it was off your radar for 3 days. And so now 6 days have gone by since the last time you asked them, please schedule it. And here's the list of inspectors I recommend. So that's what I'm getting at, Joy, about making sure that we're really explaining those things clearly so that people understand, okay, the stopwatch starts on this day and I know how much time I have and I know what's expected of me. Because again, otherwise they're going to make their own expectations. All right. Okay. Asking purposeful questions. Give me some thoughts about questions that you think are really important to ask your clients when you guys are going to sit down and write an offer that don't have anything to do with price. Anybody have any good questions they ask their clients as buyers to really get them thinking about inspections and dates and again, like escalation clauses or no escalation clauses or earnest money amounts, anything at all? Nobody asks their clients any questions?
So I usually ask, when we're writing the offer, what's important to them? What are they comfortable with? And like stuff that's like not associated with price is like, that you don't want two offers on two properties. So are you in love with this one over anything else that we've seen? And just kind of like general questions like that to make sure that that they're not going to have buyer's remorse in a week and that this is what they want.
Okay. I think along the lines of what you just said, Jordan, I think one really important question to ask, that's a question that I always ask clients, is how big of a deal is it if you end up being the buyer of this house or not? So I think that quickly gives you some perspective on like whether it's super important that a deal gets put together or it's super important that the right deal gets put together, right? Because those can be two entirely different things. And if a buyer is thinking like, well, I like this house, but it's listed for $289 and it's got this problem and that problem, and we saw the basement wall had this issue, so I would buy it, but I certainly want to do a structural inspection, and I don't think I would be that excited to pay more than $270 for it. Right? And then that's fine. Now at least you can get on the same page with them. But if you don't even ask them how big of a deal is it, whether you're the owner of this house 2 months from now or not, then you won't have their perspective. So any other good questions that you guys ask buyers?
Andrew, I think it's important to know the community in which they're looking to move to and providing insight on the market. In certain price points, multiple offers still continue to happen. And I have one right now where they are in fantasy land, so to speak, where their pre-approval is up to 400 and they feel comfortable, writing offers up to 360. And I said, then we're not looking at 360 houses because we are not gaining any ground as we continue to lose out. And it's taken them a couple times to lose out. They're getting frustrated. But then I revisit our conversation that states that maybe we need to be looking at 300, 320 houses to allow some of that open groundwork if they wanted to go up and negotiate using an escalation addendum. But I can then in turn provide data from this community, that's Twinsburg, for example, on what are the houses going over in Twinsburg, how much, and so on and so forth. So coming to the table with that information, as well as listening to what they want is important to the house, but of course their comfort zone, because they're having a little reality check where, hey, we're not maybe going to get everything we want in that 300 house that maybe that 360 house had.
Yeah. And I think, those insights do exactly that. They help the client understand, like, we're going to have to give some things up. Now, which things would we be willing to give up, right? To say that, if you had, a first floor master as one of the things that was really important to you, but none of those houses are in your grasp, to understand that and to be okay with it. And if you don't ask any questions, you don't provide any of that data, you don't ever get there, right? But I think the real key is to be asking some questions and be setting some expectations. If you're doing nothing but like letting them tell you, here's the price, I want to do this inspection, I want to do that inspection, and here's the date, and then you've got, if you're not providing anything to help set those expectations, you've probably been doing a lot of losing lately, because this has been a tough market for people who don't have the right expectations, I think. So. I had a note on here that I was curious if anybody has a story on as to making sure that in the end that these negotiations are a win-win for everybody involved. Anybody been a part of a transaction recently that either closed or didn't close that was not a win-win?
So I had one. So the client is in a different property now, but the previous one, they saw the place, you know, they really liked it, but didn't end up seeing the basement. So when we did inspection, we looked through and there's basement. Now there's a giant hole in the wall, and the inspector says that there's probably carbon monoxide leaking through. And these are like first-time investors, so they want something that's not a lot of work. So, you know, I told them, you know, all right, think about it, see what you want to do, and they said they want to walk, and I was like, so they were out of state, so I kind of told them, I was like, well, this is kind of what a Cleveland home looks like, and then they sat down and thought about it, and they're like, well, we just don't want this much work. So then we had to sign a mutual release. So obviously it's not working out for my client because now they're back to the drawing board. It's not working for their client because now the house is back on the market.
Okay. Yeah, I've definitely been a part of some that felt like from the moment we put the deal together, it was being forced and everybody felt like they were losing instead of everybody felt like they were winning. And those can be a real disaster. So I would just encourage you to try and like sniff that out before it gets there, because a lot of times those end up blowing up in your face and everybody's upset. And in the end, we lose clients over it. People lose money over it, and it's always bad. All right, talk about open-ended, closed-ended questions. You know, in the past, we've done plenty of training about making sure to ask open-ended questions to people to get them talking. Usually the person asking the question is the one who's kind of winning the conversation and getting the most out of it. And it's important that we are winning conversations with our clients, because otherwise we're not getting much from them and we don't know where to go with them. Let me look real quick.
While you're looking, can I ask a question really quickly?
Yeah, go ahead.
So just jumping back a little bit to when you just said, you know, with the situation that's not a win-win scenario, and you said something to the effect of the sooner you can figure out that it's being forced. Is there like an ideal point that you would say you kind of know when that's happening, when it's really being forced and it's going to just...
No, I mean, there's not a concrete answer to that, but I think it's important sometimes to like, whether this is right or wrong, it's what I do is, you know, when things start to get really difficult and you don't even have a transaction together yet, you don't have a contract, but, you know, buyer and seller are negotiating and things aren't, you know, everybody feels like they're losing. Everybody feels like they're the ones giving everything. Sometimes it's not unreasonable to say to your client, like, are you guys sure you want to entertain this anymore? Like maybe the best thing we could do is just not move forward, because this already feels like you're not getting what you want, but then you're talking yourself into it because you feel like, well, you're close enough. Maybe we just do it. Because then what's going to happen at the next stage? What's going to happen at the inspection? What's going to happen if the appraisal doesn't work out well? There's just, if you already feel like you've gone beyond going to the well to make the deal happen, then you just got to ask. And then at least your client has the opportunity to say to you, like, no, we still want to move forward and here's why. Or, yeah, you know, we feel like we're just really getting beaten up by the process on this one and maybe we're better off not moving forward. I mean, we've had some transactions with agents in this office recently that were like pulling teeth getting through repairs at contingency removals and stuff. And obviously then you've got a contract already, so it's a little harder, but it's like, even that, sometimes, you know, if you're a buyer's agent and you've gone on a walkthrough 3 times to look at all the repairs that are done, and every time you show up, they're not done, and then you just get a line of excuses about it. Like at some point you say to your buyer, like, like how much do you even trust this process at this point? Like, are you sure you even want this? Like, maybe rather than getting repairs, we go another route or we do something different. Like, sometimes you don't find out the true colors of the situation until it's too late and you're already in a deal. But I mean, it's okay to ask your clients sometimes, like, are you still comfortable with this? Whether it's before you have a deal or once you're kind of like getting through some kind of negotiation or repairs or appraisal or whatever. Like, I think sometimes people just keep moving forward because that's their personality. And I mean, often those are the people that a month after closing you're getting phone calls from because there's problems or there's concerns and they're just unhappy, and it's not a good situation. So, but there's not a concrete answer, unfortunately. So let's talk about asking closed-ended and open-ended questions. You see the couple of examples on here. One of the notes I have here that's, I think, the best example I can think of, especially on the buyer side lately, is how would you handle not getting that thing that's really important to you? You know, fill in the blank with whatever that thing is, whether it's a closing date or a repair after the inspection. If the choice was, you know, getting a roof repair made or not buying the house, you know, asking those questions and just getting them to talk. Can you guys think of any examples you've had recently where a question really opened up your clients and shed some light on how important something really was or how important something really wasn't as they talked about it? Any thoughts on that? All right, we'll continue on. We're going to talk more about purposeful questions, though, so hopefully some things come up for you. Interesting. There appears to be a slide missing that I was hoping to see, but okay. This is kind of along the lines of what I was just talking about. You know, really making sure people can understand what's coming next and anticipating that with them, and making sure you have an answer from them as to what the preferred solution would be, right? You know, if making a choice about a contingency removal, you submit a contingency removal to a seller asking them for a credit for something, you know, there's obviously a few outcomes that can happen, right? And discussing those outcomes with your client, you know, one is it gets accepted, that's great, they got what they wanted. Then there's a few that aren't what they wanted. One is a counter, one is a rejection, and one is a cancellation. I hope you guys all know that a contingency removal can result in a cancellation from a seller if they choose. But you know, what would happen? What would their feelings be if one of those other things happened, and how would they approach it? And then I think digging into why is that thing important to you, and then again the question of, is it more important to you than buying the house or not? And there's not a right answer. I think it's important that you share that with your clients, because I think sometimes when we start asking them those questions, they can quickly feel like we're trying to back them into a corner of moving forward and not asking for anything or backing down from the thing that they said was important to them. And it's important to say to them, like, any answer you have is okay. I just want to talk through it to make sure I'm clear with you as to what's important to you here, and getting on the same page with them, as opposed to using this conversation as a way to kind of make them feel forced into doing something that's less than ideal for them. So we don't have these scenarios, so I'm not sure what that's about. But I would love to talk through a scenario that you've had recently. Does anybody have a good scenario recently of just tell me about a client that you wrote an offer for, what their situation was, and what kinds of questions you asked them to handle getting through writing an offer and getting it under contract? This could be buyer or seller, truthfully. I will start with one, and then I'd love to hear at least one more from somebody else. I'm going to start with one that's actually from a seller of mine recently. It was three siblings, all selling their father's house that they grew up in. One of the siblings lives right next door. That's how much she likes it there. And we first sat down to discuss, what we're going to sell the house for and how we're going to move forward. And it had an old septic, and the house needs a bunch of work. And I talked through with them, like, what's really important to you guys here? Money, or a sale, or, seeing a family live in the house, or this or that? Like, what things really matter to you that would be exciting for you and make this sale feel like a win, right? And it was interesting that all three of them had a different answer. So the woman who lived next door, her answer was a person that would buy the house and take good care of it quickly, because one, she was the one taking care of it because she lived next door. And two, she wanted to be taken care of because she lives next door. One of the brothers said, making sure that we get the most money possible. And the third brother was very concerned about making sure that whoever we sold it to didn't ask them for any amount of repairs or credits or anything, just basically was like demanding it to be an as-is sale, right? So two of those people, the two brothers, are in like complete opposite of each other, right? One guy basically says, like, all I want is somebody who's never going to bother us, which probably means the lowest price. And the other guy says it's got to be the highest price. And then the sister in the middle, right? And asking them some questions about why those things were important really shed some light on things. Obviously, the sister, the answer was easy. She just was ready to move on. And then the other two, it was interesting to hear their answers. And the guy who wanted the highest price, his answer had nothing to do with actually like netting money in his pocket. It was a matter of that high price validated how good the property was, because in his eyes, it was great. It was the place he grew up and he loved it there. So it had nothing to do with like an amount of money in his bank account, and everything to do with like the price he thought was appropriate validated that the property was great, right? And then the other brother simply just didn't want anything to do with any amount of responsibility, right? So now the reality is we've got one person who's sentimental and two people who would really like to just have less responsibility, right? So this is a little easier to tackle now. So next question is, to the brother who wants the high price, is how much responsibility is he willing to take to get that price? And his answer was none. So we quickly got everybody to the same place, which is we all really want the same thing. Nobody wants to give the house away, but also nobody wants to take a lot of responsibility for selling it for more money. And so we got to a place where we could do a deal that made sense, and the house is under contract now. But if I don't ask those questions, I end up just severely overpricing the house, because the brother and sister would just cave to the guy that said he needed to sell for, I will say the first number he threw out at me was $425,000. That house is under contract now for a little over 300. So it would have been a long and horrific process had we not sat down and asked some questions and got people really saying why what was important to them was important to them. So, anybody else have any scenarios where they got to the bottom of something with people by asking some good open-ended questions and getting people talking?
So I'm not sure if this is what you're looking for, but I recently had a deal, and I kind of talked with you about this before a little bit. But so ended up, long story short, we ended up doing a land contract because, this person is looking for all cash, but they need, a house now because they have too many assets. So they need Social Security, but they can't get Social Security with all these assets. So they need the house before this. So it's a long, big thing. So now they're looking at these houses, And it's just, you know, the amount of cash they have, it's a lot of work. And it's just like, um, it's just difficult because time is an issue because they're wasting money where they're at. So then we find a place that's a little overpriced, but the seller is really specific that they need this amount of money to leave. But we believe, we both agree it's not worth this much, well, me and the buyer. So then we come to the understanding, well, okay, well, what if we paid you this much, but then decided that we will pay you monthly fees for the next 3 years so you get the money that you need. So after a little thinking, everyone had decided that that would be the best source, the best outcome for all parties.
Yeah, well, that's great. I think that's exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about, like getting people to a finish line that works for them by, you know, fully examining why the finish line is what it is, and how best to actually get there if it's not possible now, or if it's just not realistic, and why. So that's great, Jordan. So, all right, we will move into the last. There we go. All right, into present, which is by far the shortest section. So I'll be done with this PowerPoint in just a few minutes, and then we can share some ahas and talk about some things. If anybody has any questions, we could dig into those as well. I love that best practices when presenting. The very first one is call the other agent. What a fantastic idea. I still can't get over how much can be overcome and how much better the process can be if agents just talk, and how many people don't do a whole lot of talking. Then some of the other things in here, I think, are just things we all know, but we get on the phone with somebody and we quickly, like, that stuff all flies out the window, and we just talk a mile a minute. But really paying attention to nonverbal clues, just the way somebody responds to something when you say something about your offer, whether it's the price or the financing type or the closing date or the inspections, whatever it is, kind of getting a vibe from them as to whether or not that's good or bad. And if it's bad, like, why? Or if it's good, why? And then keeping quiet. I'm sure you guys have all heard at some point, whether it be in a negotiation class or even I feel like I've seen this in a movie, basically, where whoever once something gets presented or a question gets asked, the next person to talk loses, in the sense that, meaning, like, they will be the first person to give something to get whatever was just presented to happen. So once you make some statements about your offer, it's really important to just shut up for a minute and let the other agent respond, because you will find out very quickly quite a bit. Like, I've had agents call me with contingency removals and basically say, you know, my client's asking for this, whatever, this credit of $5,000, and here's why, and blah, blah, blah. And then they just keep talking. And the last sentence they say is that they know that the repairs they're asking for are worth less than $5,000, but they'd really like the $5,000. Well, okay, that seems like a pretty easy solution to counter them at $2,000 and probably get it accepted. So I think when you just say what your clients want and you're clear about it, and then stop, you will get a much better result. And obviously listen carefully, stay calm, such a huge one. I'm sure you guys have all done a deal with an agent where it got rocky for a section and the other agent just immediately freaked out. That's, you know, the fastest way to a bad result or a slow result is excitement. So please be careful about that and make sure you're not the one doing that. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you, though. And obviously focus on your customers' needs and give your offer the best chance you can. So it's another like calling the listing agent and saying, I know this offer is probably not what you people are looking for, but here it is. Doesn't exactly give you a great shot right out of the gate, I would say. So just be aware of that. You don't have anything to hide behind. You don't need to hide. It's the offer your client wants to write after you guys have discussed it. And then you move forward and give it the best chance you can. Okay. So now, once you've done that, it's really important that even if the offer is not acceptable, it's important that between you and the other agent, you guys find where the common ground is. whether that's only around price or only around dates or only around the fact that your buyer is better financially qualified than other people they have interested, doesn't matter. Find the common ground that is exciting for the other side. And then build on that. You know, that's going to be the foundation of getting to an accepted offer, is, you know, building on that common ground. Then obviously asking questions about what it's going to take to get to the next common ground, the next agreement, or how that's going to happen. Obviously, you know, sometimes there's more moving parts. I think more so on like an ROC than on a purchase agreement, but like, how do we accomplish the thing that my client wants, even though your client doesn't necessarily want to do it that way? And that's back to what Colleen said at the very beginning about creativity and really coming up with a plan that suits your client's needs and is palatable and desirable for the other party. And then lastly, like I had said before, being clear with your client about when, you know, how important getting the deal done versus getting the right deal done is. And that's what helps you understand when it's time to walk away. And please, 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 I can't say this enough. Don't consider walking away to be a failure. You know, our job isn't to get deals closed. Our job is to get the right deals closed. And those are two different things. So be honest with yourself about that, because I think if you're overly focused on just getting deals closed, you will end up with the award for the most unhappy clients. So.
That's a great point.
Thanks, John. That gets us to the end. I'm curious to hear some ahas from you guys about kind of what we've talked through today. I'd love to hear from some different people. I feel like I've only heard from about 4 different people or so. So if there's some people that haven't chimed in yet, I'd love to hear from you and just hear some ahas, or hear some, if something's changed about the way you think or the way you'd approach conversations with clients or other agents.
Actually, I just want to comment that last point that you just made. Being able to walk away from some situations. For me, I had to learn that for myself over the past few years, that it's okay to let go of some business, because sometimes they'll have you running around like crazy, and you still aren't able to realize the goal that you want to get to. So being okay to let go of some kind of business if it's not aligning with your principles and things like that. Sometimes you need to just move back, and it's far better to have a peace of mind in your business rather than being around here, you know, feeling like I got to chase every nickel and dime. So yeah, saying that, that's perfect.
It's interesting coming from you, John. I think back to when I first started in the principal broker role here, an issue that you and I had to tackle with a buyer of yours that I think you could probably look back on that transaction now and feel like, you know, like there was a lot of things that felt like they were forced, that like, if like to better present the option of like, you know, maybe it's best if this just doesn't happen. Like, right. It maybe would have been the best outcome. It's hard to know, right? You don't necessarily know, but I think you can kind of get that vibe where you're to the point like, you know, there may be a few too many moving parts here that aren't working out.
Exactly.
And that's okay. That's fine. It's all right. So anybody else? Any good ahas to share?
Hi, Andrew. Bernadette here.
Bernadette.
I think many things were said from you and other agents that were very, very helpful. But I think what I walked away with is just how important it is to have a good flow of communication with the other side and not feel like it's us against you and we're gonna fight it out like a tug of war, but more just partners in the transaction. So when you were speaking about that was really helpful, as well as many other tips. I got all kind of notes over here, but I think that has helped my last few transactions or hours, a team just flow really nicely and work through some challenges a lot more smoothly than I can compare transactions when I first started a year ago.
Yeah. Awesome. That's good to hear. And yeah, you're certainly right on that. I mean, I think, you know, bullying your way through a transaction or just constantly placating your way through a transaction both of those are awful ways to get through deals for you and your clients. So right on. Anything else? Any questions? Anything that was talked about that you thought, I don't know how I feel about that, or I don't fully understand what you're getting at? Anything at all?
I didn't have so much of a question as just to kind of piggyback off what Bernadette was saying. As a new agent, this was really helpful. I mean, I have like notes upon notes over here. So
Awesome.
thank you.
Awesome.
I really connected with the fact that you honed in on, you know, those key questions and getting underneath the thing, you know, to find out what the real objective is and what the goal is and how we're going to get there. Sometimes you can't get to that goal and knowing when to walk away. I really respect that.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can now see the chat for the first time since I just unshared my screen. I'm just curious if there's anything in here that I've missed. Doesn't look like there is. Yeah, the last thing I used from about a half hour ago. So is there anything else? If not, I want to leave you guys with a couple of ideas that are just kind of like the overarching pieces to this stuff from my perspective. Okay, I will say two things. I mean, we've already talked about them, but they're the two things that I think really matter most about all of this, that we can ground this all in. One is if you don't interact with it currently, figure out a way to put it up somewhere where you work regularly or where you spend time on a daily basis. Know and internalize our belief system as a company. So I think if the foundation you're working from is our Y4C2Ts, all of the things you're doing with your clients and with other agents will be far more successful, because every piece of that belief system is positive for your personal real estate business and our real estate business as a brokerage. So just make sure you're always kind of like coming from that place is, I guess, the best way I can put it. And then the only other thing I had written here at the very end is just a bold law, which is just come from contribution. I think oftentimes in negotiating, we turn negotiating into a subtractive game, which is back to that quote at the very beginning. And negotiations don't have to be subtractive, they can be additive. And we can bring things to the table that are helpful for the other party and helpful for our client. And if that's your mindset around negotiating, you will be a better negotiator, but secondly, you will be a more attractive negotiator, both with your own clients as well as other agents. You stay in this business long enough, people are going to know who you are, and you're going to have a reputation of either being somebody that agents like to work with or don't like to work with. And it's really important for both your success and your client's success that you be one of the agents people like to work with, I think. So come from contribution when it comes to negotiating, and come from a place of making things work for all parties instead of using a baseball bat. So that's all I've got. So unless anybody else has any other questions or ahas, I think we've made it about 15 minutes short here.